Good day. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Montreal, Canada for Reason to Resist on July 16th, 2025. 1 week ago, the world watched in stupefaction as the war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu announced that he had nominated Donald J. Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize.
Express the appreciation and admiration not only of all Israelis, but of the Jewish people, and many, many admirers around the world for your leadership of the free world, your leadership of a just cause, and the pursuit of peace and security, which you are leading in many lands, but now especially in the Middle East. We have great opportunities. The President has an extraordinary team, and I think our teams together make an extraordinary combination to meet challenges and seize opportunities. But the President has already realized great opportunities. He forged the Abraham Accords. He's forging peace as we speak in one country, in one region after the other. So I want to present to you, Mr. President, the letter I sent to the Nobel Prize Committee. It's nominating you for the Peace Prize, which is well deserved, and you should get it.
Thank you very much. This I didn't know. Wow. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Coming from you in particular, this is very meaningful. Thank you very much, Bibi.
Thank you. Thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you.
Now, you might be wondering why I just said nothing for about 10 seconds. Well, that was me being speechless. What I found most mind-boggling about this exchange was Trump's reaction to the news. He said at the very end of that clip that what made this nomination special for him is that it came from Benjamin Netanyahu, a man who is arguably the most evil warmonger alive today. In any event, Trump has wasted no time in making a mockery of his nomination for the Nobel Peace Prize. 2 days ago, he announced that he plans to prolong and even escalate the US-led war on the Russian Federation. At a meeting with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, the man who recently referred to Donald Trump as Daddy, Trump announced he would send billions of dollars of weapons to Ukraine. The weapons will be sent, we are told, via European allies who are supposed to purchase the weapons from the United States. Trump also said that an unnamed country was ready to provide 17 Patriots to Ukraine. What exactly he meant by Patriots, presumably he did not mean 17 patriotic Americans, but was referring instead to either Patriot air defense missile batteries or the missiles themselves that are used in those batteries. The problem with either of those interpretations, first of all, is that it's almost inconceivable at this stage that anybody, including the United States, has 17 Patriot batteries to give to anybody else. And secondly, if he meant missiles, these systems are required to use 2, sometimes 3 missiles just to shoot down, if they can, one incoming missile. So this would, these 17 missiles, if that's what Trump intended by 17 Patriots, would be expended very rapidly in the course of a single missile attack, a single salvo of missiles being fired by the Russian Federation at Ukraine. So it really doesn't make a lot of sense, whatever he meant by 17 Patriots. According to an article published today by The Guardian, the Zelensky regime is confused, as are all of we, by Trump's announcement, and is waiting for further details on the billions of dollars worth of U.S. military equipment promised by the Donald on Monday. Now, at his meeting between Trump and Rutte on Monday of this week, not only did the U.S. announce that it would send more weapons to Ukraine, the Trump administration also threatened to impose even more sanctions on Russia.
The reasons that you're here today is to hear that we are very unhappy, I am, with Russia. But we'll discuss that maybe a different day. But we're very, very unhappy with them, and we're going to be doing very severe tariffs if we don't have a deal in 50 days. Tariffs at about 100%. You'd call them secondary tariffs. You know what that means. But today we're going to talk about something else. And as you know, we've spent $350 billion approximately on this war with Russia and Ukraine, and would like to see it end. It wasn't my war, it was Biden's war. It's not my war, I'm trying to get you out of it. And we want to see it end. And I'm disappointed in President Putin because I thought we would have had a deal 2 months ago, but it doesn't seem to get there. So based on that, we're going to be doing secondary tariffs if we don't have a deal in 50 days. It's very simple. And they'll be at 100%. And that's the way it is. That can be more simple. It's just the way it is. I hope we don't have to do it.
Now, have you noticed that every time Donald Trump is asked about the Ukraine war, somehow he manages to wedge into the answer, not once, but oftentimes several times, that this is Biden's war? He just can't get enough of saying that this depraved proxy war belongs to Joe Biden. And it's almost as if some close advisor or advisors to Donald Trump have told him, every time you're asked about the Ukraine war, just say until you're blue in the face that it's Biden's war. But I'll come back to the whole question of what Donald Trump has been told by his advisors a little later in this report. I also note that Trump's estimate of the amount of money spent on this depraved proxy war by the United States is approximately $350 billion. I'm not quite sure, from what orifice in his body Donald pulled that number out of, but let's assume it's true. If that's in fact the case, almost in excess of a third of $1 trillion being spent on this proxy war, why would Donald Trump, the nominee for the Nobel Peace Prize, be committing yet more billions to a war which Ukraine is clearly doomed to lose? Now, in making yesterday's announcement, Trump posed yet again as the adult in the room. In a patronizing manner, Trump said he was very disappointed in Vladimir Putin. Yet it's the U.S. that continues to pump weapons into Ukraine, a country that sits on Russia's border, not on the border of the United States, and is in fact a few hundred kilometers from Moscow, and is in fact thousands of kilometers away from the shores of the United States. Why does the U.S. government continue to fuel this war if its president is the adult in the room? Shouldn't it in fact be the Russian government that is disappointed by Trump's behavior? After all, we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that the administration's arming of Ukraine and sanctioning of Russia have nothing whatsoever to do with international law, human rights, or democracy. And how can we be damn certain of that? Because the Trump administration is perpetrating a genocide in Palestine. And if it gave a damn about international law, human rights, and democracy, it would have brought that genocide to an end. Now, in his meeting with Rutte, what did Trump mean by 100% tariff? It would be surprising if what he meant was 100% tariffs on Russian products and services coming into the United States, because at this stage, there's virtually no trade between Russia and the United States. And so imposing those tariffs would have no meaningful impact on the economy of the Russian Federation. Trump did say, he did use the words secondary tariffs. And in the context of trade sanctions, secondary sanctions generally refer to sanctions that are imposed by on countries that are not the ultimate target of the sanctions, but rather countries or companies that do business with the country that is the ultimate target of the sanctions. So here, especially if these sanctions are going to relate to Russia's oil and gas, the primary parties who would be detrimentally impacted by these secondary tariffs would likely be China and India, two very important countries to the global economy because of the quantity of oil and gas that they purchase from the Russian Federation. And it's not likely that either of them, in particular China, would take kindly to being slapped with 100% tariffs, because they've made a decision in the exercise of their sovereign judgment to purchase relatively inexpensive Russian oil and gas, and to do so at the very time that the United States and its Western allies, as I mentioned, are perpetrating a genocide in the West, or in Palestine, and hypocritically, claiming or donning for themselves the mantle of humanitarianism and respect for international law. And certainly there would be other countries that would be negatively impacted by these secondary sanctions, including Turkey, which buys significant quantities of Russian oil and gas. And there are also European countries to this very day that continue to purchase significant quantities of Russian oil and gas, notwithstanding the 17 rounds of sanctions that the European Union has imposed upon the Russian Federation, while imposing no sanctions whatsoever on Israel's genocidal regime. Another question raised by this statement that Trump made in front of Rutte is, why has he given Russia 50 days to agree to the long-demanded ceasefire? In 50 days, it's not inconceivable, given the way things are going, that the Ukrainian forces will have collapsed at some important part of the 2,000-kilometer long front, or perhaps all along the front. It's not impossible that within 50 days, Russia will have occupied all of the parts of the 4 oblasts it annexed during the war that it doesn't already occupy. It already occupies the vast majority of the territory that it annexed, but there's a significant amount of territory remaining within the control of the Ukrainian forces, and 50 days just might be enough to divest the Ukrainian forces of their controls of these remaining areas. One thing is for sure, whatever Russia can achieve by way of territorial advances within the next 50 days, given the intensity, the scale, and the frequency of the drone and missile attacks upon, and the bombs, including the guided bombs, 500 kilograms, 1,000 kilograms, that Russia is pummeling Ukraine with every day, Ukraine will undoubtedly suffer an enormous amount of damage at this rate within the next 50 days, whatever territorial advances Russian forces can or cannot make during that period. In related news, the Financial Times reported yesterday that according to its sources, Trump privately encouraged Zelensky to hit Moscow with long-range weapons. This is I couldn't pull up the Financial Times report because it's behind a paywall, but here's a Reuters report published yesterday about the Financial Times report. And you'll see at the bottom it says, U.S. President Donald Trump has privately encouraged Ukraine to step up strikes deep in Russian territory, even asking the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky whether he could hit Moscow if the U.S. provided long-range weapons, the Financial Times reported on Tuesday. Is this even remotely consistent with Donald Trump's repeated claims that he wishes to bring the Ukraine war to an end? Does he have any reason to believe that escalating the war in this manner is going to provoke anything other than a further escalation from the Russian Federation? In fact, what we're seeing now in Ukraine, with unprecedented numbers of drones being fired into the country every day, could reasonably be interpreted as an escalation, an escalatory response by the Russian Federation to the spiderweb, so-called spiderweb operation, in which Ukrainian forces and or their proxies inside the Russian Federation launched weeks ago, damaging attacks on Russia's nuclear strategic bombers. There's absolutely no reason to believe that strikes deeper into Russia, and particularly on Moscow, and especially if they cause significant numbers of civilian casualties, will provoke anything other than a furious response from the Russian Federation, and almost certainly will not result in a ceasefire. Now, whatever the answers to the questions I've posed thus far may be, one thing is beyond rational dispute any longer, and that is that Trump has absolutely no intention of keeping his promise to end the Ukraine war, something he said repeatedly that he would do within 24 hours of returning to the White House. So this raises a question, which many have been debating in the alternative media. Namely, was Trump lying when he promised to end the Ukraine war during the presidential election of last year? Or did he simply change his mind after returning to the White House in January of this year? And frankly, I've been amazed at how many people, intelligent, well-informed people in the alternative media, refuse to accept the proposition that Trump was simply lying when he claimed repeatedly in the presidential election last year that he intended to bring the Ukraine war to a rapid conclusion. And here's an example of such reluctance, and this is a recent interview involving Professor John Mearsheimer of the University of Chicago on the deep dive program by former Lieutenant Colonel of the United States Army, Daniel Davis.
A lot about getting this thing done. And I always hang up and say, well, that was a nice phone call. And then missiles are launched into Kiev or some other city. And I said, it's strange. And after that happens 3 or 4 times, you say, the talk doesn't mean anything. My conversations with him are always very pleasant. I say, isn't that a very lovely conversation? And then the missiles go off that night. I don't want to say he's an assassin, but he's a tough guy. It's been proven over the years. He's fooled a lot of people. He fooled Bush. He fooled a lot of people. He fooled Clinton, Bush, Obama, Biden. He didn't fool me. But what I do say is that at a certain point, ultimately talk doesn't talk. It's got to be action.
And I'm almost speechless there myself. I mean, what do you think of that? Has he been fooled?
No, I think the key point here, Danny, is that Trump fooled himself. Right. Putin didn't fool him. Putin has been a straight shooter on this issue from the get-go, especially with regard to Trump. You don't have to like Putin's position, his bargaining position, but it's been perfectly clear from the beginning. What Trump did was fool himself into thinking that he could get Putin to change his terms of a settlement. And he has these various conversations with Putin that he says are nice and pleasant conversations. But who cares whether he has nice or pleasant conversations with Putin? The key issue here is what does he think of Putin's terms, and is he going to accept them or not? And this is what I assume they talk about to some extent in their conversations.
Now, before I comment on this notion that Trump fooled himself, I just want to offer a view about the statements or suggestions that Trump made in that clip, which Daniel Davis showed to John Mearsheimer, that Putin is untrustworthy and is playing a deceptive game. Who is Donald Trump to complain about other world leaders playing a game of deception? This particular character, the current president of the United States, was basically stringing the government of Iran along for weeks as he was plotting behind the scenes to attack the Islamic Republic in a criminal war of aggression using America's rabid Israeli attack dog. So elaborate was the deception that days after the attack was launched by Israel a few weeks ago on Iran in flagrant violation of international law, the Americans and the Iranians were scheduled to meet. The Iranians had been led to believe that the Americans were going to meet with them to continue discussions about Iran's nuclear program. And Trump knew perfectly well that Israel was planning to attack and greenlighted that attack, even though he had deceived the Iranians into thinking, or at least tried to deceive them into thinking, that he was not yet ready to pull the trigger and that he was going to continue to see where diplomacy might lead. So if anybody is engaged in shameless deception, it's Donald Trump, and he really has no right to complain about Vladimir Putin's honesty or lack thereof. Now, let's deal with this notion that Trump fooled himself. I do not find that view, and despite all the respect I have for John Mearsheimer, I don't agree with everything he says, but I do have a lot of respect for his analysis and his willingness to critique U.S. foreign policy, to condemn the genocide in Gaza and so forth. But on this particular issue, I don't find his analysis to be persuasive at all. As Professor Mearsheimer himself noted, the Russian government's position has been crystal clear since at least the latest, the summer of last year. Obviously, 6 months before Trump returned to the White House. In the summer of last year, President Putin gave a speech in which he laid out Russia's demands for ending the war. They included, one, the international recognition of Russia's annexation of 4 oblasts in what was Ukraine, namely Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson. Also, its annexation of Crimea. So that was one core demand. The second core demand was no NATO membership for Ukraine. The third core demand was the protection for the rights of Russian speakers living in areas controlled by Kiev. And the fourth core demand was denazification. And there's some question about what that all means, but it's been a consistent theme, in fact, from the very beginning of this war in February of 2022, that Ukraine denazify. And these core demands, which were articulated at the latest in June of 2024, months before Trump returned to the White House, have been the consistent position of the Russian Federation, as Professor Mearsheimer noted, throughout this time. And they've never, neither the Russian president nor his surrogates, his spokespersons, other persons within the government, the parliament of the Russian Federation, no one has ever wavered from any of these 4 demands. Meanwhile, Zelensky has repeatedly rejected all of Russia's core demands and has left the strong impression that he'll never accede to any of them. This means that if Russia were to agree to a ceasefire without its core demands being met in advance of the ceasefire, there's no reason to believe that Zelensky would agree to any of those demands after the ceasefire came into effect. So what would be the point of a ceasefire, given the inflexible position of Zelensky with respect to all of Russia's core demands? Finally, it's foolish to think that without any of its demands being addressed, Russia would agree to a ceasefire when it is advancing all over the battlefield and inflicting severe damage on Ukraine through drone and missile strikes, apparently in part because Ukraine's air defense systems are so depleted. A ceasefire would simply give retreating Ukrainian forces the time to regroup, to replenish their air defenses, to build up ammunition stocks, to recruit and train more soldiers, which Ukraine sorely needs, and also to fortify their frontline defenses. So a ceasefire would work almost exclusively, if not exclusively, to the benefit of Ukraine's beleaguered forces, and really achieve nothing for Russia without presenting any realistic prospect of any of Russia's core demands being met. So it seems, implausible in the extreme that Donald Trump, as limited as his competence may be, actually persuaded himself that through his charmful machinations, he was going to get Vladimir Putin to agree to a ceasefire without any of Putin's core demands being met. And in fact, this is precisely the message which the Russian Federation has consistently sent to Donald Trump before or after Donald Trump returned to the White House. No ceasefire until our core demands are met. So it's been clear from the beginning, my friends, that Donald Trump never intended to keep his campaign promise to bring a swift end to the Ukraine war. Let me remind you that in February of this year, mere days after Donald Trump returned to the White House, he sent his defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, off to Brussels to deliver a keynote speech to the Ukraine contact group. And in that speech, which I talked about numerous times on this program, Hegseth demanded that the other NATO powers increase their defense spending or their military spending to 5% of GDP annually, and that they use the increases in defense spending to assume the burden of arming Ukraine. He urged them to drastically increase their military spending so that they could give more weapons to Ukraine. This is the exact opposite of what one would expect from an administration that is determined to bring this war to an end. You don't go urging your allies to double or triple their military spending in order to rearm Ukraine if you're serious about putting an end to the Ukraine war. Furthermore, the Trump administration has shown a considerable affinity for the policy prescriptions of two characters from the neocon community. Their names are Elbridge Colby and A. Wes Mitchell. And you'll see here, this is an article from Foreign Affairs in December of 2019. Colby at that time was a principal of something called the Marathon Initiative. He had served as U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Strategy and Force Development from 2017 to 2018. That would be during the first Trump administration. And A. Wes Mitchell, also a principal at the Marathon Initiative, a think tank, a neocon think tank, who served as U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs from 2017 to 2019. Again, that was during the first Trump administration. Now, these two characters have been writing recently. This was originally brought to my attention by John Helmer. We talked about this months ago on Reason to Resist. They have been writing, actually for years, that what the United States government needs to do is it needs to pivot away from Ukraine and reallocate its military assets to West Asia, and particularly to China, and that Europe needs to pick up the slack, increase its defense spending, and assume much, if not all, of the burden for keeping the Ukrainian war going. In fact, in his speech to the Ukraine contact group in February of this year, U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth characterized this as a division of labor. This is precisely what Colby and A. Wes Mitchell have been counseling from the beginning. Not that the Ukraine war be brought to an end, but that the responsibility for continuing that war be shouldered primarily by the Europeans, while the U.S. reallocates military assets and capabilities to West Asia, and particularly to China. And the simple rationale underlying these policy prescriptions is that the U.S. doesn't have the capacity to fight all of these wars at once. It's not that these characters, these neocons, want the wars to end. They just want to be able to fuel them in a way that takes into account the military realities confronting the United States. So that is what is really going on here, folks. That has always been the plan from day one. It has been abundantly clear, and there's really no plausible evidence that Trump foolishly convinced himself that he was going to be able to persuade Vladimir Putin simply by yabbering at him to agree to a ceasefire that was contrary to the interests of the Russian Federation and would only benefit the Zelensky regime and the Ukrainian forces. Colby, by the way, was confirmed, Elbridge Colby, one of these two neocons, as the Trump administration's Undersecretary of Defense for Policy in April of this year. So he clearly has an influential role within the Trump administration, not just informally, but formally. And quite apart from all this, and as I've said repeatedly, you are what your record says you are. If you want to make an intelligent estimation of what the Trump administration is likely to do during the second administration, the second tenure of Donald Trump, well, the best place to start is by looking what the Trump administration did during the first 4 years that it was in office. And let me summarize for you what it did. It was the first U.S. administration to send lethal weapons to Ukraine. Did it repeatedly during the first Trump administration. It engaged in provocative military exercises with Ukrainian forces. The Trump administration pulled the United States out of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty during the first Trump administration, which was a bedrock of nuclear security and non-proliferation and disarmament in the European theater in particular. The Trump administration continued to hew to the line that Ukraine was going to become a member of NATO. It never disavowed, the Bush administration's declaration back in 2007, I believe it was, that Ukraine would definitely become a member of NATO. And then beyond, the area, the region of Eastern Europe, Trump's conduct during his first administration was even more prone to provoke war. It was the Trump administration, which in its dying days, the first Trump administration, assassinated Iran's top general, Qasem Soleimani, in Baghdad, along with other Iranian and Iraqi officials, which was quite arguably an act of war against the Islamic Republic. And it didn't, devolve into a full-blown war only because the Iranian government responded with relative restraint to that extremely provocative crime. The Trump administration continued to fuel the bombing of Yemen the first time around during the first Trump administration. Donald Trump had American troops in Syria, illegally occupying a large swath of that country, stealing its oil, something he openly admitted to, and subjected the Syrian regime of Bashar al-Assad to crippling economic sanctions. The Trump administration, the first time around, recognized Israel's illegal annexation, conquest and annexation of the Syrian Golan Heights. So, I could go on and on, folks. The record of Donald Trump from 2016 to 2020, or 2017, I should say, to 2021, was one of neoconservatism in the extreme. Donald Trump was surrounded by neoconservatives. He empowered them during his first administration. And in every conceivable respect, his inclination was towards war. Even the Afghanistan conflict, although he talked about ending it, Trump in his first administration did not do so. And he left that messy business ultimately to his successor, Joe Biden. Now, if I'm correct that Trump never intended to end the Ukraine war, then why would he have lied about his intentions during his campaign for the presidency last year? Well, the reason, in my view, is very simple. Trump wanted the votes of Americans who were sick and tired of the U.S. lending money and sending weapons to Ukraine, and those who were tired more broadly with the U.S. tendency to pursue and perpetuate forever wars. And one might also ask, if Trump lied about wanting to end the Ukraine war, which is what I maintain, and if he lied simply to gain the votes of Americans who wanted the war to end, then why did he continue to pretend for these past 6 months that he was trying to end the war after winning the election last year? Why did he engage in this peace charade during the past 6 months? Well, I believe the answer to that question is also straightforward. Trump did not want to alienate his base because he'll need their votes in the midterm elections. And this, for Donald Trump, it's not simply the midterm elections. It's not just his agenda, which is at stake. His very survival as president of the United States may be at stake, because if he were to lose control of the Senate and the House, there's a pretty high risk that the Democrats would pursue his impeachment. So he has a personal stake, not just a policy stake, in maintaining control of the House and the Senate in the midterm elections. And the best way for him to do that is not to alienate his base. Trump has wanted to be able to tell those who voted for him in part or in whole because of his promise to end this war and to scale back US military interventions abroad, he wanted to be able to say to them, look, I made every effort to persuade the Russians to do a ceasefire. I tried really hard to put a stop to the bloodshed in Ukraine, but the Russians were just too unreasonable, too adamant, too inflexible. And at the end of the day, reluctantly, I made the decision to continue to support Ukraine. It was a choice I didn't want to have to make, but the Russians basically put me between a rock and a hard place. So in disseminating that message to his base, he would be able to limit, the political fallout of having betrayed his promise to end the Ukraine war, something which I think is absolutely crystal clear he never actually intended to do. Now, as I've said a few minutes ago, many respectable commentators in the alternative media seem reluctant to accept that Trump lied shamelessly about his true agenda when he was running to be president last year. One of the things that he talked about when he was running to be president last year was the release of the Jeffrey Epstein files. So let's take a look at what Donald Trump had to say during last year's election campaign about the release of those files.
You declassify, you can answer yes or no to these.
Yeah.
Would you declassify the 9/11 files?
Yeah,
Would you declassify JFK files?
yeah.
Would you,
I did a lot of it.
Would you declassify the Epstein files?
Yeah, I would.
All right.
I guess I would. I think that less so because, you don't know it. You don't want to affect people's lives if it's phony stuff in there because there's a lot of phony stuff
Yeah.
with that whole world. But I think I would, or at least
Do you think that would restore trust? Help restore trust?
Yeah, I don't know about Epstein so much as I do the others.
Now, it will have been obvious to you all that there was a significant difference between the answers that Donald Trump gave to the questions of whether he would release the JFK files and whether he would release the 9/11 files, and the answer that he gave with respect to the question of whether he would release the Epstein files. With respect to JFK and 9/11, it was a straight up yes, no qualifications. But when he was asked about the Epstein files, he hesitated. He said, yeah, I think I would. And then, I'm not so sure. And maybe this and maybe that. I'm worried about people being embarrassed. Yeah, I'm sure you are, Donald. But clearly, the tenor of his answer to the question of whether he would release the Epstein files was quite different, markedly different, even though he did more or less say yes, than the answer he gave with respect to JFK and 9/11. So when he was asked about the Epstein files, Trump clearly hedged. And recently, George Galloway talked about this on the mother of all talk shows. Again, George Galloway, like John Mearsheimer, is a commentator and an analyst for whom I have great respect, particularly his political career. George Galloway has been an outspoken defender of oppressed peoples around the world, particularly in the region of West Asia. And although I don't always agree with George Galloway, this is an analyst and a politician whom I do greatly respect. And I want to show you what George Galloway had to say a couple of days ago about this question of Donald Trump changing his tune now and going from saying that he would release the Epstein files to announcing that he would not do so.
As to anyone that in his New York days, Donald Trump was a hedonistic, sybaritic, fornicating individual who was of low morals. Let me leave it at that. That will come as no surprise. The fact that he was filmed whilst doing so must have come as a surprise to him. I say that because if Donald Trump had known that he was so heavily implicated in the Epstein papers that they could not possibly be released, he would not have spent the last few years threatening condign punishment on every pedophilic rapist that was found to be a part of the Epstein affair. He would not have campaigned in the presidential election, saying that he was going to open the books, saying that he was going to unmask everybody involved in this shocking, horrific scandal. His Attorney General would not have claimed that she had the file on her desk. His Attorney General would not have said that there are hundreds of thousands of hours of videotape, which has deeply shocked even the hard-bitten Department of Justice. If Donald Trump had known that he featured so heavily in the Epstein affair that it could not be released, his director of the FBI and deputy, for now, director of the FBI, would not have been swashbuckling around on every podcast, every television screen that they could find, warning that justice was coming for Epstein's victims, warning that every criminal would be named and shamed, unmasked, and forced to take the perp walk. If Donald Trump had known that he could not release the Epstein files, he would not have been saying that he was going to, right up until the very last minute. The White House would not have handed out these binders, which now we're supposed to believe were actually empty binders, even though they said on the front, Epstein Affair Part 1. Donald Trump clearly intended to go through with all the promises that he had made about justice for the victims of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell.
So before I comment on George's interpretation of Trump's behavior, I just wanted to share with you that George used a word in describing Donald Trump that I'd never heard before, sybaritic, S-Y-B-A-R-I-T-I-C. It's a very useful word in the context of, discussions about Donald Trump and Epstein. What it means is fond of sensuous luxury or pleasure, self-indulgent. Sybaritic indeed. Now, as you've heard, George's basic theory is that if Donald Trump had believed that he was implicated by the Epstein files, he never would have promised, or, as you saw from that clip, it wasn't a promise. He never would have indicated that he was going to release the files if he became the president. And that what actually happened, George believes, is that after Trump returned to the White House, he discovered that in somehow, some way, he is compromised or implicated in those files. And he changed his mind and decided that he was not going to release the files after all. And I'm going to tell you why I find this too to be an interpretation of Trump's behavior that is entirely unpersuasive. First, the feds arrested and indicted Jeffrey Epstein in July 2019 during the first Trump administration. Surely at the time of that arrest, the feds must have done, prior to the arrest, extensive investigation into the Epstein files, into the large body of evidence pertaining to his criminal activities. And if Trump was implicated by those files, his Justice Department almost certainly would have alerted Trump to that fact before they arrested Epstein, or at least at some point during the first Trump administration. Now, I'd like to show you the announcement that the Justice Department made in July 2019 when it announced the arrest of Jeffrey Epstein. And you'll see here, this is a press release issued by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, where Epstein was arrested and indicted. And on July 8, 2019, it stated, I'm reading the highlighted language here, the indictment unsealed today alleges that between 2002 through 2005, Epstein sexually exploited and abused dozens of underage girls by enticing them to engage in sex acts with him in exchange for money. Epstein allegedly worked with several employees and associates to ensure that he had a steady supply of minor victims to abuse, and paid several of those victims themselves to recruit other underage girls to engage in similar sex acts for money. He committed these offenses in locations including New York, and Palm Beach, Florida. Now, again, the time period to which the indictment relates is 2002 to 2005. Why is that significant? Well, in 2002, at the very beginning of this period, Trump told New York Magazine, quote, "I've known Epstein for 15 years. Terrific guy. He's a lot of fun to be with. It is even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side." Close quote. So Trump's Justice Department in 2019 was focused on a period of time in which Trump himself had publicly bragged about his close ties to Epstein and Epstein's perverted inclination for young women. In these circumstances, in my view, it's inconceivable that Trump did not want to know all the way back during his first administration exactly what the Epstein files revealed about him. And his Justice Department had those files, had the resources to comb through them and to determine to what extent, if any, they compromised Donald Trump. Trump must have known exactly what those files revealed about him back then, if not earlier. I note in passing, by the way, that Epstein died only 6 weeks later. Again, during the first Trump administration, here's a report from August 10th, 2019. Jeffrey Epstein dead by apparent suicide at Manhattan jail. The wealthy financier accused of sex trafficking was found unresponsive in his jail cell by an apparent suicide at approximately 6:30 a.m., the Federal Bureau of Prisons said in a statement. Now, as you have probably understood by now, those of you who are listening to our program today, there's a lot of controversy around exactly what happened to Jeffrey Epstein. So the Justice Department just released what they claim to be a videotape shot outside the door of the cell at the time that the cell in which Epstein was housed at a New York facility, at the time at which he allegedly committed suicide. As the Justice Department acknowledged, there's a minute missing from that videotape, and the explanation which the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, has given for that missing minute is frankly incomprehensible. She blathered something like, this was a standard practice, that there would be a minute missing, and there's nothing unusual about this. There's absolutely no reason to believe that, it was necessary from a technological perspective that there be a gap in any of the videotaping of this entrance. Surely the New York prison system had the capability to ensure that there was constant 24/7 video coverage of the entrance to the cell, and there would have been no need, technologically speaking, for there to be, any portion of time, a minute or any other portion of time, during which no video was being taken. Interestingly, the New York Post just published an article in which it quoted a convicted mobster who spent many months, I think it was 7 months, in that very cell. And the mobster is adamant that given the layout of the cell, the way it's designed and the way it's furnished, that it would have been near impossible or impossible for anybody to commit suicide in that cell. Also, there's the fact that Epstein reportedly tried to kill himself a couple of weeks before he died. Whether that's true or not, it's not clear, but there was a claim made that he was attempting or had attempted to kill himself. And if that's so, then the prison guards should have been on the highest of alerts at the time that Epstein allegedly committed suicide. So if I'm correct, and Trump knew back in 2019 whether the Epstein files implicated him, and if they did in fact implicate him, why would Trump have said last year that he would likely release the Epstein files? And this is a very pertinent question, which George himself asked in that clip that I just showed you. Again, my view is that the answer to this is simple and entirely plausible, and that's that if Trump wanted to win the election, he had no choice but to say what he said in response to the question about whether he would release the Epstein files. Just imagine, what would voters have thought about Trump if Trump had said last year when he was asked that question that he would not release the Epstein files, especially after he had just said without any hesitation that he was going to release the JFK files and the 9/11 files. Given Trump's notorious, widely known friendship with Epstein, most voters almost surely would have concluded, if Trump had then refused to release the Epstein files, that Trump was unwilling to do so because they showed that Trump himself had done some very bad things in the course of his friendship with this depraved criminal, Jeffrey Epstein. If Trump wanted to win the election, and clearly he did want to win the election last year, then in my view, he said exactly what he needed to say to win. He indicated he would release the files, but without making an ironclad commitment to do so, giving himself some wiggle room to get out of the whole quagmire when the time came for him to announce to the public that, in fact, he was not going to release the files. And by the way, if you haven't figured out yet just how audaciously Trump lies, I've got to show you this. This was an exchange he had, I believe this is on the White House lawn, with his spokesperson, his chief spokesperson standing beside him, in which he's asked about what his Attorney General Pam Bondi told him about these files. Watch this.
Ross said that there should be transparency in the Epstein case. Do you agree with her, sir?
The Attorney General's handled that very well. She's really done a very good job. And I think that when you look at it, you'll understand that. I would like to see that also. But I think the Attorney General, the credibility is very important. And you want credible evidence for something like that. And I think the Attorney General has handled it very well.
Did she tell you, what did she tell you about the review? And specifically, did she tell you at all that your name appeared in the
No, she's given us just a very quick briefing. And in terms of the credibility of the different things that they've seen, and I would say that, these files were made up by Comey, they were made up by Obama, they were made up by the Biden we went through years of that with the Russia hoax, with all of the different things that we had to go through. We've gone through years of it, but she's handled it very well, and it's going to be up to her. Whatever she thinks is credible, she should release. Yeah.
So we are being asked to believe that Donald Trump's loyal soldier, his sycophantic Attorney General, didn't tell Trump whether or not he was mentioned in or implicated by the Epstein files that were in the possession of her department and which she reviewed. Are you kidding me, folks? If you believe that, I got some putrid swampland in Florida to sell to you. It is inconceivable that she did not tell Trump whether or not his name is mentioned in those files, his picture appears in those files, or there's videotape of him. Simply inconceivable. And frankly, Donald Trump, as I said, almost certainly knew the answer to that question no later than 2019, when his Justice Department indicted Jeffrey Epstein. The other thing that just is so absurd, his claim now, he's saying that this whole thing about the Epsteins, dealings with powerful, wealthy men, this is a hoax that was made up by, the Obama administration and others within the Democratic Party and by Comey. I mean, as I showed you, the press release put out by Trump's own Justice Department in 2019 accused Jeffrey Epstein of having molested dozens of young women, recruited them, coerced them, him directly and through, his surrogates, and that some of those women were themselves tasked with, or not women, but girls, were tasked with recruiting other girls for, Epstein's nefarious purposes. Now, if you read the press release issued by the Justice Department back in 2019, it doesn't clearly state that those girls were molested by anybody other than Jeffrey Epstein. It doesn't suggest that there were other clients, Johns, criminals, depraved lunatics who were given the opportunity to exploit and molest those girls. But we all know that Jeffrey Epstein spent inordinate amounts of time around very, very powerful men, very wealthy men, and routinely had them over to his palatial residences, and that his residences had video cameras and audio recording devices hooked up throughout them, which were almost certainly used in order for Epstein to record the dastardly criminal deeds of his friends and his business associates. So the idea that this is all just a hoax cooked up by Obama and Comey is implausible in the extreme. Only the most cult-like, deluded supporter of Trump at this stage would believe this nonsense. The reality is, folks, and we all know that this is the reality, Donald Trump is protecting the people who are implicated, the powerful, wealthy people who are implicated by those files, and he may well be one of those people. So I want to turn now to the question of how Trump, because my thesis is, basically that Trump lied about his whole agenda when he was running to be the president of the United States the second time around. And he lied in particular about his desire to bring the Ukraine war to an end, and about his intention to release the Epstein files. I maintain that it was never, ever his desire to do either of those things. So I thought it would be useful to remind my audience that of Trump's sort of the infrastructure or the resources that Trump has employed in the past when he has contested a presidential election campaign. And some of you may recall the name of a firm called Cambridge Analytica. This was a British firm that Trump employed during his first presidential campaign in 2016, an election that many observers, including me, expected Trump to lose. And you'll see here, this is an article from March 2018 in The Guardian about information leaked to The Guardian relating to Cambridge Analytica's blueprint for Trump's surprising victory over Hillary Clinton in the 2000 election. And I'd like to read to you some interesting excerpts from this article. The blueprint for how, I'm quoting now, the blueprint for how Cambridge Analytica claimed to have won the White House for Donald Trump by using Google, Snapchat, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube is revealed for the first time in an internal company document obtained by The Guardian. The 27-page presentation was produced by the Cambridge Analytica officials who worked most closely on Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. A former employee explained to The Guardian how it details the techniques used by Trump campaign to micro-target U.S. voters with carefully tailored messages about the Republican nominee across digital channels. Intensive survey research, data modeling, and performance optimizing algorithms were used to target 10,000 different ads to different audiences in the months leading up to the election. The ads were viewed billions of times, according to the presentation. The document was presented to Cambridge Analytica employees in London, New York, and Washington weeks after Trump's victory, providing an insight into how the controversial firm helped pull off one of the most dramatic political upsets in modern history. None of the techniques described in the document are illegal. However, the scandal over Cambridge Analytica's acquisition of data from more than 50 million Facebook users is lifting the lid on an industry that has learned how to closely track the online footprint and daily lives of U.S. voters. Despite the advances made in data-led political campaigning, these were techniques that, according to the presentation, Trump did not have access to when Cambridge Analytica joined his campaign in early June 2016. The Republican nominee, who had just secured sufficient delegates to become the candidate, still had no speakable data infrastructure, no unifying data, digital, and tech strategy, the document states. Kaiser said Cambridge Analytica staff told her that they were stunned when they arrived at Trump's headquarters in Trump Tower, New York. There was no database of record. There were many disparate data sources that were not connected, matched, or hygiene, she said of the process. There was no data science program, so they weren't undertaking any modeling. There was no digital marketing team. And then at the end of the article, it states, one of the final slides from this presentation shown to The Guardian explains how the company used paid-for Google ads to implement persuasion search advertising to push pro-Trump and anti-Clinton search results through the company's main search facility. One slide showed how the company ensured that voters searching the words Trump-Iraq war would encounter paid-for search results that were favorable to his campaign. Control the first impression, the slide says, with an arrow pointing to a search result that states, Hillary voted for the Iraq war. Donald Trump opposed it. So, what does this all mean? This means that going all the way back to the 2016 presidential election, Donald Trump was using sophisticated modeling and consulting services to find messages that would be most appealing to and would most effectively manipulate slices of the electoral population. This was scientifically driven analysis, which was informed by huge amounts of voter data. In fact, in 2018, Cambridge Analytica was forced to close down as a result of a scandal involving its abuse of massive amounts of Facebook data. And what this leaked documentation showed is that one of the messages which the Cambridge Analytica people wanted Trump to convey and did convey through their advertising after having analyzed reams of voter data was Donald Trump opposed the Iraq war, whereas Hillary Clinton supported it. In other words, Trump is the candidate of peace. And clearly, based upon the fact that he won that election in what The Guardian rightly described as one of the greatest political upsets in American political history, Trump would have, I think, concluded readily that the strategy worked. So why wouldn't he have employed the strategy again in 2024 and lie through his teeth about his intention? As I said, even though he presented himself as the candidate of peace in 2016, his record during his first administration was that of a bloodthirsty warmonger. So all he did was repeat in the 2024 election what he did successfully in 2016. Now, you may be wondering, who was on Trump's team in the 2024 election campaign? It certainly wasn't Cambridge Analytica, because it was required to slow down or shut down after the Facebook scandal. And here you have a listing of his inner campaign team, Trump's inner campaign team from the presidential election last year in 2024. And you'll see that the co-campaign manager, one of them, is named Chris Lascaris, who's a partner at a firm called FP1 Strategies. Now, I had not heard of FP1 Strategies before until I began to investigate this particular matter. But here's what the website has to say about this firm. FP1 understands and excels in every aspect of a modern, data-driven political campaign. We know how all the pieces fit together because of the breadth of our collective experience. Our team members have been general consultants, media strategists, campaign managers, and communications directors on some of the biggest campaigns in recent years, and blah, blah, blah. So you'll see here you have a firm which probably in many ways resembled Cambridge Analytica and has a propensity or favors the approach of pursuing data-driven political campaigns. So I suspect very strongly that the kind of advice that Donald Trump received with success in 2024 was similar to what he got from Cambridge Analytica back in 2016. And, clearly that advice included an admonition for Donald Trump to present himself as the candidate of peace. Now, just as an interesting aside, since we're on the subject of Cambridge Analytica, you'll see here, this is an article published last year by a website called Newstracks, which identified, the biggest spenders on Trump's campaign. And you'll see campaign inbox, a PAC, I think it's a political action committee, co-founded by an ex-Cambridge Analytica executive, was one of the biggest money raisers for Trump, earning over $17 million. The story was prompted by, this is from Newstrack, the story was prompted by a specific question related to my research on the 2016 campaign. Are any former Cambridge Analytica executives actively involved in the 2024 campaign? It turns out that a firm called Campaign Inbox, which was co-founded by Matt Oskowski, the former head of product at Cambridge Analytica, has earned over $17 million so far from 2 PACs that support Trump. I have followed the staff of Cambridge Analytica and their parent SCL Group for many years, and in this 2020 chart included several companies set up by Matt Oskowski, including Campaign Inbox, Human Behavior and Data, Propria, which became part of Cloud Commerce, which is part owned by Trump's 2016 digital guru, Brad Parscale. Campaign Inbox was founded in 2017 by Matt Oskowski, Parks Bennett, and Jason Manship. The website has very little information about the company and does not list any staff names. Cambridge Analytica didn't exactly go away, in connection with the Trump's 2024 election campaign. As you saw, there are people who were intimate participants in its observations, played an important role in funding and perhaps advising the Trump campaign last year. Now, why am I telling you all of this? I'm not suggesting that Cambridge Analytica or people associated with it, were determining Trump's strategy for contesting the 2024 election. All I'm saying, and maybe they did, I just don't have hard evidence of that fact. What I'm suggesting to you is that when Trump decided how to run an election, both in 2016, 2024, he relied on consultants who offer sophisticated analysis about how to influence voters. And his tendency has been to follow that advice. We also know from the 2016 election that Trump, as I said, tried to pose as the candidate of peace while characterizing his principal opponent as the candidate of war. In 2020, Trump's high-priced consultants likely told him the same thing. In 2024, they likely told him the same thing that they told him back in 2016. If you want to win votes, you need to appeal to all the people out there who are fed up with the Ukraine war and America's other forever wars. I suspect they also told him, although he didn't probably need to be told this, that if he wanted to maximize his votes, he should say that he intended to release the Epstein files if he was asked about it, and that under no circumstances should he say that he would not release the Epstein files, because that simply was going to exacerbate the suspicions that were already out there that Trump did dirty deeds in the course of his long and close relationship with that child molesting criminal, Jeffrey Epstein. As for whether Donald Trump had sexual relations at some point with one or more of the children trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein, I don't purport to know the answer to that question. But I do know this: Donald Trump, as I speak, is helping to perpetrate a genocide in occupied Palestine. And if he's willing to perpetrate a genocide, then he is surely capable of anything. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Montreal, Canada on July 16th, 2025.